Hello, I'm Jeanette and I'm a specialist and client success professional with eSight. As you can probably hear, I am from the UK. I was born and brought up there. I spent the first part of my life in Kent, where I went to school, and then I went on to university in London and spent most of my working life in London after graduating university, having lived in France for a while. And I spent most of my time in London until I moved from the UK to the United States over a decade ago now. It's unbelievable. So I have been registered as blind since birth. I do have a little bit of usable vision in one eye. I have a condition, it's very rare, it's called Peter's anomaly. It primarily affects the cornea. So I've had a number of corneal transplants which are extremely beneficial to me. People often ask me, how does being visually impaired impact your life? How does it, what effect does it have on your life? It's very difficult to answer that question because I suppose I've always had the visual impairment, so I've never really known anything else. However, what I think I can deduce from comparing what I've been through with other people is that, particularly in education, I think it had an impact. I was fortunate enough to have learnt to read and write before I actually started primary school. My mother was a certified Montessori teacher, so she taught me via that method. And I went to primary school, mainstream primary school, but by the time I was approaching 8 years old, the print was so small in the books that I really couldn't feasibly carry on in that system. So I had to go to a school to learn Braille, which I did. I went to a school in Sevenoaks in Kent, learnt Braille, finished my education there. I was 8 years old and I was there till I was 16. Then I went to college and then I went to university, studied French and English, and spent some time in France as part of that. And then after graduating, I certified to teach English as a foreign language to adults, and very much enjoyed that. I worked at the BBC for some time. I worked at the BBC World Service, and after a certain amount of time there, I went to BBC Worldwide, where I was an account executive there. And so I think the impact of my visual impairment was that I had a mixture of mainstream education and specialised education. So that was really quite an impact. Other than that, I would say that I came from a musical family, and as such, I was performing from a very young age. I'm a classically trained pianist, and I also play the steel drum instruments, which is awesome. And I travelled a lot when I was younger with my music. So I think even though I had a fairly conventional time in terms of education, I would say it was very much balanced by my travels, by my time in music, and by the somewhat, more adventurous life I was living in terms of travel, in terms of seeing different cultures and being treated very much as one of the people that I was working with. So how did I get into eSight? Well, I have taught visually impaired people different forms of technology for many, many years. I set up a business training people in access technology, and my husband actually discovered an article about eSight in a publication, and he told me about it. I was very skeptical indeed, because I know generally about access technology, I know about different forms of technology for people with visual impairment, and the claim was that eSight could really improve the sight of somebody who was legally blind or registered as blind. I had never seen this before, so I had to go and demo it for myself. So when we found out where we could see this amazing device, we went along, and I remember meeting the gentleman, and I went into a room. Now normally when I go to an ophthalmologist, okay, they usually will put a board on a wall about 6 or 7 feet away. I will almost never see beyond the top letter on that board. Now when I went to this demonstration, the gentleman was, I'm going to say 9 feet away from me, or approximately 9 feet. And I just immediately said, well, I'm not going to be able to see anything on the board. Without the eSight, I couldn't see anything. I could just see the paper itself. I put the eSight device on, and I could see the top letter, and I could see the letters below the top letter on the next line, and I could see the third line. And then he told me to magnify or zoom up on the eSight, because they have various zoom levels that you can adjust. So I magnified, I zoomed up, and I was able to see the next line down, and the next line down, and the next line down, until I almost saw every single line on the page, read it really well. I could not believe what I was seeing, and at the end he said to me, you know, you could actually see enough, technically speaking, to drive, but you can't drive with eSight, because, you know, it's a small window of view, but it gives you the detail, enormous detail. But technically, you legally would fall into a category where you could drive, arguably, if you had that much sight, you know. So I actually decided to try the eSight at home, and after trying it for a while, I was absolutely sold. And I purchased the eSight and worked with it, got some training, it was fantastic. And then I was contacted by who is now one of my colleagues at eSight, who said that they were actually looking for somebody with my kind of background, with somebody who's worked with visually impaired people who could speak fluent French. And of course I forwarded my resume, and I was very happy to be invited onto the eSight team. Now, since I've been using my eSight, I've found a level of independence that's altogether quite different from the independence I've always had. I've always travelled by myself, I've always done a lot by myself, I've travelled to different countries by myself, and worked independently. You know, it's just had a pretty normal life actually. Now with eSight, I find that I can read my own handwriting now, which I couldn't before. I can go into a supermarket and read what's on the shelves, what's on the aisles, and you know, it gives you a level of independence that you couldn't really imagine, I think, before. So for example, you know, if you're going to, let's just say you're going to Sainsbury and you want to see what's in the aisle, what I tend to do is put my eSight down. We have what's called a bioptic tilt. So I put my eSight down so I can see directly through it. And then when I want to actually see something at a height, let's just say an aisle sign, I'll tilt it maybe halfway up, look up with my eyes into that tilt, and I'll use the remote control and I'll zoom up until I can see in detail what's written on those signs. Same thing if I was in London, for example, and I was standing at a tube station waiting for a train, and you know where you see the boards of writings that are going on when a train is about to arrive, and you see train 1, train 2, train 3, and where they're all going. I used to have to ask people where the train was going, and now I'll be able to tilt up my eSight, look up into the tilt, and see that writing on the board. So it's quite incredible. I have to say, I did start off by using the eSight 3. The eSight 3 is a wired device. It's a little smaller than this, but it has a connected remote control to this device. It's connected with a wire. This one is completely wireless, and it has a remote control that's connected via Bluetooth. This eSight can also be connected to an eSight app that you can get for an iPhone, for an iPad, for an Android device. And I think, you know, the feeling of freedom that I have with this eSight compared to the eSight 3 is amazing, because I have no wires, I have no tethering. I can just walk around and keep the eSight on, and it's very, very versatile. So, in short, that's my story. There's a lot more to tell, but I'm a very happy owner of eSight.